They're confessions that do not sound like apologies, but like hymns. Keith Urban's came softly, wrapped in the quiet dignity of a man who's lived long enough to see his own reflection change. At 57, sitting alone in a Nashville studio, with the lights dimmed to gold, he finally spoke of love, not the kind that sells records, the kind that breaks and rebuilds you until you no longer need the illusion of forever. The smiling golden boy. For decades, he'd been the smiling golden boy of country music. Blue eyes, leather boots, a voice that made pain sound romantic. To the world, he was the dreamer who had conquered America and captured the heart of Nicole Kidman, the porcelain queen of Hollywood. They were the embodiment of destiny, two stars who found each other across continents, both marked by fame, both searching for peace. But fame has a way of turning love into theater. It takes something sacred and puts it under glass, asking it to breathe without oxygen. Keith and Nicole had been married for nearly 2 decades, a miracle in a world that devours its own idols. From red carpets to award shows, they looked inseparable. Yet beneath the smiles, there was always a quiet tremor, an unseen cost. A cage made of sound. Every note he sang on stage carried the weight of nights spent apart. Every applause hit a heartbeat that missed home. He'd later admit that even in the middle of sold-out arenas, he sometimes felt like he was performing inside a cage made of sound. Fame, he once said, isn't freedom, it's just a louder kind of loneliness. So when Keith finally spoke the truth about his marriage, it wasn't scandal that came spilling out, it was grace. "I loved her more than I knew how to," he confessed, and sometimes love changes shape. It doesn't die, it just stops needing to prove itself. A man telling the truth. The world expected drama, betrayal, something sensational. What they got instead was a man telling the truth about what it means to love in the long shadow of perfection. The story that followed, his rise, his demons, his devotion, his breaking, isn't just about one marriage. It's about the journey of a soul learning how to stay open even after being shattered by fame. It's about the small-town boy from Caboolture who wanted nothing more than to play guitar and ended up learning that every chord of success comes with a note of sacrifice. At 57, Keith Urban is no longer chasing applause, he's chasing honesty. He's no longer singing to be adored, he's singing to be understood. And as he strums his guitar in that quiet Nashville room, you can hear it. The sound of a man who has stopped performing for the world and started speaking to eternity. Life before the spotlight. This is not the story of a fall from grace. It's the story of a man who finally decided to live without pretending. And this, right here, is where the melody begins. Confession wrapped in music. A truth that took a lifetime to learn. Long before the spotlight ever found him, before Nashville, before stadiums screamed his name, there was a boy sitting cross-legged on the rough carpet of a small Australian house, tracing the frets of a guitar with trembling fingers. The air smelled of dust and eucalyptus. Outside, cicadas sang like they were keeping time for him. Inside, Keith Lionel Urban, the son of Robert and Marianne, was learning that music could be both an escape and a mirror. He was born in Warringah, New Zealand, on October 26, 1967, but grew up in Caboolture, quiet working-class town in Queensland. His father sold instruments part-time, his mother loved country records, and their home pulsed with the heartbeat of American sound. Glenn Campbell, Don Williams, Merle Haggard. Voices from faraway lands drifted through the walls like sermons for a restless child. Making every ordinary life extraordinary. Keith didn't just hear the songs, he saw them. The stories, the ache, the grit. They taught him that even ordinary lives could sound extraordinary if you played them right. At 4, he picked up a ukulele. At 6, a guitar. His father told him, "If you want the world to listen, make it feel you." Keith did. He practiced until his fingers blistered, then practiced more. When he couldn't afford new strings, he learned to make broken ones sing. Every evening, the family's tiny living room became a stage. His parents clapping, neighbors listening through thin walls. He wasn't dreaming of fame yet. He was dreaming of belonging, of a place where the music inside him matched the world around him. His unusual childhood. School was harder. He was shy, awkward, sometimes teased for his accent or his obsession with American cowboy music. While other kids played rugby, he memorized guitar solos. Teachers said he was distracted. His classmates called him strange, but the strings never judged him. They became his first true friends. Music, he once said, was the only language I didn't stutter in. By the age of 9, he was entering local talent shows, singing covers of country songs with a voice too soft for his size, too honest to ignore. The judges smiled. His parents beamed. But even when he won, Keith didn't celebrate. He went home, sat by his window, and replayed every mistake, every missed note, determined to be better. A sanctuary from everything. That perfectionism, both his gift and curse, began young. When he was 12, his father mortgaged their modest home to buy him a top-quality guitar, a bold, perhaps reckless gesture of faith. "Make it count," his father said. Keith never forgot. He spent hours after school watching Chet Atkins videos, copying licks until his fingers cramped. While his friends chased girls, he chased tone. The instrument became a sanctuary from everything he didn't understand about the world. By the age of 15, he was playing in local bars, the youngest musician in rooms filled with smoke, laughter, and regret. He was too young to drink, too old to be a dreamer. Night after night, he stood on sticky floors, singing to half-interested strangers who clapped out of habit more than out of admiration. But even then, he performed as if the universe itself was listening. "You learn who you are on those nights," he said later. "You learn whether you're doing this for love or for applause." Transferring emotions into melody. It was in those dark pubs that he found the first fragments of himself, the poet hidden inside the performer. He learned to make sadness sound beautiful, to turn longing into melody, to turn silence into rhythm. Every chord he struck was a rebellion against smallness, against invisibility. He wasn't running from home. He was running towards the life he felt waiting somewhere far away. When the final school bell rang and his friends scattered towards safe jobs and staid lives, Keith packed a suitcase, a guitar, and a map covered in possibility. He kissed his mother's cheek, hugged his father tight, and whispered, "I'll make it worth it." Then he left Caboolture with nothing but faith. Faith that music could save him from disappearing. He didn't know then that it would save him again and again, from loneliness, from failure, from himself. Gritty, hard, and humbling. Nashville. The word alone sounded like prophecy to a boy from Caboolture. It was the promised land, a land where people turned pain into poetry and called it country music. But then Keith Urban finally arrived there in 1992. The dream looked different up close. It wasn't golden, it was gritty, hard, and humbling. He was 24, broke and unknown. The streets were filled with musicians chasing the same miracle. Every bar, every open mic was a battlefield of hope. He slept in cheap apartments with thin walls where the hum of air conditioners mixed with the hum of guitars. He recorded demos for other singers, played backup for artists who barely noticed him, and sold his instruments more than once just to pay rent. A trial by fire. But even when money ran out, the music didn't. He carried it inside him like oxygen. It's not ambition that keeps you alive, it's hunger, pure hunger. Keith's early years in Nashville were a trial by fire. He formed a band called The Ranch, 3 men bound by desperation and a shared dream. They played smoky bars, county fairs, anywhere that could pay in beer or applause. Crowds were small, indifferent, but Keith played every note like he was already famous. The nights bled into each other. loading gear at dawn, writing songs in motel rooms, staring at ceilings that leaked. When exhaustion came, he drowned it in whiskey, habit that felt harmless at first, then necessary. The loneliness of the road can make a man believe in false friends. The bottle was his most loyal companion. Keith Urban's debut album. In 1999, after nearly a decade of struggle, the dam finally broke. His self-titled American debut album, Keith Urban, hit the radio like a revelation. His voice was different, not twangy like traditional country, not polished like pop. It was raw, tender, and electric. Songs like But for the Grace of God and Where the Blacktop Ends became anthems for dreamers who were tired of pretending. The critics called him the new face of country, but what they really meant was that he sounded human again. Fame began to flicker at the edges. The ACM named him Top New Male Vocalist. The CMA handed him the Horizon Award. He smiled, but inside he was just terrified. For the first time, he had something to lose. The industry that once ignored him now expected him to be perfect. Every lyric was scrutinized, every performance judged. The applause was louder, but so was the pressure. Country grit with a rock soul. He spent endless nights in studios chasing the sound that had made him famous, the mix of country grit and rock soul that no one could quite copy. But fame, like fire, needs fuel. When inspiration ran low, he turned again to the bottle. The same passion that made him magnetic on stage became destructive off it. He laughed louder, partied harder, worked longer, all to quiet the gnawing doubt that he didn't deserve any of it. Then came the night that changed everything. A charity event in Los Angeles, 2005. The crowd shimmered with stars, but none burned brighter than the woman who walked past him, Nicole Kidman. She was elegance wrapped in quiet sadness, a contrast of power and fragility. He introduced himself with a shy grin, and she smiled back with the kind of warmth that melts armor. She didn't see the fame, Keith would later say. She saw the man underneath. A muse and medicine. Their connection was instant, electric, undeniable. Both had known loneliness at the top. Both had wrestled with the emptiness of applause. For the first time in years, Keith felt seen. He began to write differently, gentler, more hopeful. The songs no longer came from pain, but from the possibility of healing. Love, for him, became both muse and medicine. But the past doesn't vanish just because the future looks beautiful. As their romance deepened, his addiction shadowed him like a jealous ghost. Even as he fell in love, he was still falling apart. But when Nicole looked at him, he saw a version of himself that might still be saved. "She gave me the courage," he said, "to stop surviving and start living." By the time they married in 2006, Keith Urban was standing at the crossroads of heaven and hell, one hand holding a guitar, the other holding redemption. The year was 2006, and Sydney glowed like a cathedral built for love. The world's eyes turned to St. Patrick's Estate, where candlelight flickered against sandstone walls and violins sang beneath the stars. Two weary souls finding home. Keith Urban stood trembling at the altar as Nicole Kidman walked toward him, glowing in lace and quiet faith. Their wedding felt less like celebrity spectacle and more like two weary souls finding home. That moment became the heartbeat of the life they built together. Soon after, Keith released Love, Pain, and the Whole Crazy Thing, an album hailed as his masterpiece. Songs woven from scars, confession, and triumph. On stage, he shone with charisma and fire, yet behind the curtain he battled tremors, prayerful doubts, and the pressure to stay steady. A haven of music. Nicole's career soared just as profoundly. Her performances in Moulin Rouge, The Hours Australia, and Rabbit Hole solidified her as Hollywood's rare blend of fragility and strength. But while fame demanded much, Nashville offered her peace, offered them both peace. Their home became a haven of music, Barefoot Sundays, and daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, dancing in the yard. They learned to be more than stars. They became partners and parents grounded in ordinary joy. Yet love lived in the spotlight, carried its own strain. Constant touring and filming pulled them across continents. They stayed connected through daily calls, letters, and voice messages that always seemed to circle back to the same longing. I miss you. Keith Urban enters rehab. 4 months after their wedding, Keith Urban shook the world when headlines announced he had entered rehab. For him, it wasn't failure. It was a plea for help under the crushing weight of fame and fear. Nicole Kidman didn't retreat. She moved toward him with unwavering loyalty. She visited privately, shielded him from the media, and refused to let the world turn his struggle into spectacle. When later asked why she stayed, her answer was simple: because love doesn't run. Keith emerged sober and humbled, credited her belief, not fixes, for saving his life. His albums Defying Gravity and Get Closer reflected that rebirth, shimmering with gratitude and the fragile strength of recovery. The quiet truth behind the glow. For years they appeared united, red carpets, intertwined hands, shared glances echoing their wedding night. Yet behind the glow lay the quiet truths of any long marriage: seasons of distance, soft fractures fame loves to magnify. As they guarded their privacy, rumors only swelled. Still, they stood together, bound by the vow that the world would not define them. Over time, however, a gentler silence settled, an evolution rather than an ending. Their love didn't break suddenly, it shifted slowly, like a tide drawing two shores apart, a story still unfinished. Illusion of a perfect marriage. To the world, Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman appeared radiant, smiling on red carpets, laughing in interviews, embodying the illusion of a perfect marriage. But behind the curated glamour, quiet distance grew between them. It wasn't the miles of touring or filming that separated them, but a deepening silence. Nicole traveled the globe for her roles, while Keith moved from city to city on tour, the applause of strangers replacing conversations meant for two. When together, they were gentle but guarded. When apart, their messages were polite, careful, threaded with unspoken worry. Their love still existed, but its rhythm had changed, becoming something rehearsed rather than felt. Spoke rarely of the marriage. Friends noticed the shift long before the public. Keith spoke lovingly of his daughters, his music, his recovery, but rarely of the marriage. Nicole praised his heart and resilience in interviews, choosing her words with the tenderness of someone handling something fragile. Their shared life had been beautiful, filled with children, road trips, whispered confessions, and music. But even the strongest fairy tales evolve. In their Nashville home, Keith's guitars and Nicole's scripts sat like quiet symbols of two lives moving in parallel rather than together. Still, despite the drifting, they continued trying, holding on to what they could. Unfolding of their final chapter. Keith and Nicole's final chapter unfolded gently, not dramatically. Their love didn't end with fights or accusations, but with quiet gestures that revealed a soft truth. They still cared for each other, even if they were no longer whole. Friends never saw anger, only maturity, tenderness, and two people slowly accepting that their paths were changing. When the final conversation arrived, it felt like a release rather than a rupture. Nicole whispered, "We didn't fail, we grew," and Keith agreed, grateful for the years they had shared. Their tears were warm, filled with appreciation rather than regret. Choosing peace over drama. When they faced the photographers afterward, the world awaited scandal. Instead, it witnessed dignity. Two souls choosing peace over drama, still connected even as they walked separately. In his studio, Keith began composing a new song, not a heartbreak anthem, but a quiet acknowledgement that some loves don't end, they simply evolve. By early 2023, the silence between them had become unmistakable. Fans noticed their growing absence from each other's public lives, solo red carpets, separate events. Social media gone still. During a press tour, when Nicole was asked if they were still together, she offered only a soft, honest truth. "He will always be my family." Setting their story down with care. Nicole's simple answer, "He will always be my family," didn't break anything. It simply set their story down with care. It marked an ending wrapped in tenderness, farewell that honored everything they had lived together. For Keith, the word family took on a deeper resonance. He carried it like a lingering melody, letting it soften his days and seep into his songwriting. Their story was never a tragedy of scandal or betrayal, but an evolution. Two good hearts letting go with honesty and grace. There were no villains, no broken vows, just time, change, and the quiet truth that even great love can transform. Gentle, inevitable, complete. To the public, it looked like an ending. To Keith, it felt like a chord resolving. Gentle, inevitable, complete. When the headlines faded, he became unusually still, discovering a new peace in quiet mornings and unhurried days. Silence became clarity. For the first time since boyhood, he could hear the space between the notes, breathe without the weight of applause, and look both backward and forward without fear. A trial through fire. When asked about Nicole, he no longer deflected. He spoke with calm gratitude. "We walked through a lot of fire together," he said. "Sometimes leaving the fire doesn't mean leaving each other. It just means you learned what the flames were trying to show you." He felt no regret, only appreciation for the years, lessons, and love that shaped him. In his late 50s, Keith no longer needed to embody perfection. He understood at last that love doesn't complete you. It reveals who you've always been beneath the noise, the fame, and the expectations. Love and letting go. Keith Urban eventually revealed that his truth wasn't rooted in scandal or failure, but in a universal lesson about love and letting go. During a concert, he admitted that love wasn't about clinging tightly but knowing when to release someone while still wishing them peace. The audience sensed the significance of the moment, a man shedding his last defenses. This awakening transformed his music. His newer songs, including The Hard Way Home, embraced vulnerability, exploring forgiveness and healing without bitterness. Fans recognized a gentler, wiser Keith, someone who understood that surrender can bring peace. Co-parenting with grace. Nicole's presence lingered softly in his life as they co-parented with grace and shared milestones without tension. He spoke only of her with gratitude, acknowledged the belief she once had in him. Keith also began discussing emotional sobriety, emphasizing that true healing involves living without numbing oneself and relinquishing the illusion of control. He explained that life can't be molded to one's desires. You simply show up with honesty each day. Ultimately, Keith stopped performing for validation. Every word, lyric, and gesture became an authentic expression of presence. Happiness, he realized, wasn't applause, but the ability to sit with himself without needing approval. That quiet understanding became his new, hard-won gospel. A storm that had learned to rest. In Nashville, those who saw him these days described him as lighter, calmer. He still laughed easily, still cracked jokes, still played like a man possessed, but his music now carried an undercurrent of serenity, sound of a storm that had finally learned to rest. When he sang, it wasn't to prove he'd survived, it was to remind others they could too. And maybe that was the truest confession of all. And the real miracle of Keith Urban's story wasn't fame or success or even love. It was forgiveness for himself, for the past, for the boy who had once thought happiness lived on stage. He found it instead in silence. The crowd was already on its feet before the last chord faded, but Keith Urban didn't bow. He simply stood there, the guitar hanging loose at his side, sweat glistening like light on water. His eyes scanned the sea of faces, thousands of them, waiting for him to say something, anything. But for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to prove. Sanctuary, battlefield, confessional. The spotlight warmed his skin, and he realized how long he had lived inside it. The stage had been his sanctuary, his battlefield, his confessional. But tonight it felt different. It felt like closure. He smiled, small and unguarded, then leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking, "for listening to my life." The crowd erupted, but Keith barely heard them. He was somewhere else, back in Caboolture, barefoot kid strumming an old guitar, believing that sound could save him. He'd been right. It did. It always had. The quiet man behind the legend. At 57, Keith Urban had become the quiet man behind the legend. The edges of his fame had softened, but the glow with him burned steady. He'd walked through addiction, adoration, marriage, loss, and rediscovery, and somehow came out not jaded, but grateful. He no longer called what happened with Nicole a heartbreak. He called it a season. Some people think love ends when it changes, he said once, but love doesn't die. It evolves into memory, into gratitude. They still spoke often. They still laughed about old moments. They still celebrated milestones with their daughters. Sometimes they were seen together, smiling, not pretending. To the public, it looked ambiguous. To them, it was peace. They had rewritten the meaning of forever. Just him and his guitar. In his final tour before taking a long hiatus, he ended every show with a song that didn't exist on any album. It was just him and his guitar. No lights, no drums. He called it Still Here. The lyrics were simple, almost fragile. I've broken in half just to learn how to bend. I've lost what I loved just to love it again. And if the world forgets my name or my song, I'll still be here where I've belonged all along. Each night when he sang those words, the audience fell into reverent silence. There's no roar, no scream, no frenzy, just the collective heartbeat of people who understood, who had lost, endured, and forgiven themselves too. He did not announce a farewell. When the final show ended, Keith didn't announce a farewell. He simply walked off stage, handed his guitar to a crew member, and disappeared into the darkness behind the curtains. Outside, the Nashville night waited, soft, familiar, humming with the same sound it had carried the day he arrived decades ago, young and terrified. He took a breath, looked up to the stars, and smiled. The sky was vast, unjudging, infinite. He felt small again, and that felt like freedom. Later that year, in a quiet interview on a candlelit porch, a journalist asked him, "After everything, the fame, the love, the loss, what do you think is the meaning of it all?" Keith thought for a long moment, watching fireflies dance across the Tennessee light. Then he said, "It's all just music, isn't it? The mistakes, the miracles, they're all part of the same song. You just have to keep playing." He paused, then added softly, "And if you're lucky, someone you once loved will still be humming it too." A spirit between past and peace. Camera lingered on his face, older now, lines carved by laughter and pain alike, and for a brief moment he looked almost translucent, like a spirit midway between past and peace. Behind him the wind rustled through the trees, carried the faint echo of a melody that seemed eternal, and as the screen faded to black, one could almost hear his voice, tender and infinite, whispering the final line of love's chorus. "Every song I ever wrote was just my way of saying I'm still here." That he finally admitted was the truth. Not scandal, not sorrow, but serenity. Not the end of love, but its transformation. The boy who once dreamed of Nashville found something far greater than fame or forgiveness. He found stillness. And in that stillness, Keith Urban remains, not as an idol, not as a myth, but as a man who turned his wounds into music, his silence into peace, and his love into something that will never stop singing. If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon,